So I think we're supposed to start with a little introduction. I'll start just talking about my history with North Shore. I started playing 6 years ago for North Shore. I'm born and raised in Chicago. I actually had a friend introduce me to rugby who I played football with in high school. So he told me to come out and play. I played for a spring season for UIC, went to a couple tournaments, and then decided to go ahead and start playing women's rugby. North Shore got me when I was a spry 19 years old. So I've been playing with North Shore for a long time, and it's been a really cool and long journey in rugby. I've actually got to go see the Women's Rugby World Cup in Ireland because I got to tour with the Midwest Thunderbirds. So I've actually gotten to see Sylvia play a couple times, and we played against each other before in the WPL. So this is really cool to kind of come full circle. Sylvia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. First off, I'm super excited to be here. So, yeah, I started playing with North Shore in 2007, and I played with them for about 2.5 years. I started playing rugby in college at Marquette University in Milwaukee, and during my last semester of school, I did a full-time internship at DePaul University in Chicago. So that's when I found Chicago North Shore. And after college, I was working in Milwaukee and living outside of Milwaukee, but continued to make the commute to play with Chicago North Shore because obviously I fell in love with the team, and they were the best team around in that area at the time. So wanted to play, as high level as I could. So continued to commute and play with Chicago North Shore until 2009 when they formed the WPL. And then at that time, the only teams in the Midwest that were competing in the WPL were in the Twin Cities. So that's when I made the move up to Minneapolis to play with the Twin Cities Amazons. And I played with them, so from 2009 until 2018. So that was my last season of club play. During that time, kind of made my way through the U.S. pathway. It looked very differently at that time than it does now, but made my way through kind of the local, state, and then regional teams. So Wisconsin select sides, Midwest select sides, and then eventually made my way to US U19s, US U23s. Made my way to the senior side team in 2011, and then got to represent the U.S. compete in 2 World Cups. So 2014 in Paris and 2017 in Ireland.
Woo!
Yeah, it was awesome. And then when I retired as a player, got more into coaching rugby, and now I'm fortunate to be able to coach full time at Harvard University. And then I oversee the strength conditioning I'm the lead strength conditioning coach for the women's national team as well.
That's awesome. What a kind of career that you've had. That's really great. And continues to be your career now. So I'm a personal trainer at Equinox, so that's kind of like my involvement in fitness. But I'm also a coach for a local club here, a college team here at Loyola University. So let's talk a little bit about that. I have a couple of questions here laid out by our lovely fans. But I would love to talk about the transition from player to coach, since we've kind of already touched on it. So what has your transition from player to coach been like?
Yeah, so I fortunately, while I was playing, I was able to, most of my coaching experience comes through strength conditioning. So I graduated Marquette with a degree in exercise science, and my first job out of college was as a strength conditioning coach at Marquette University High School, so an all-boys high school in Milwaukee. I was the assistant strength conditioning coach there. And then when I moved up to the Twin Cities, I found my way into another high school, Totino Grace High School, and was there full-time as their strength conditioning coordinator. So throughout my playing career, I was very fortunate that I could continue to progress through my coaching career in terms of strength conditioning and being very involved in that world, which opened up a number of doors later on in terms of the high performance team with the U.S. But and then in terms of coaching the sport, when I was in Minnesota, started helping out with different teams. So a couple of my good teammates and good friends and teammates were coaching at University of Minnesota. So I helped them out for a couple of seasons here and there, and just kind of, help volunteering with different clubs and teams. And I think that transition from player to coach has been a lifesaver. Rugby's been consumed my world for years. And so I don't think I could ever imagine not having it be a major part of my life. I think that would be really, really difficult to transition from, as a player to go just to, a career focus without having rugby. So for me, I've been very blessed that rugby remains a key component in my daily life. And I think that being around it on the daily, being immersed in that environment still has really helped with that player coach transition.
Yeah, it's hard. What do you do with your time without rugby?
I don't know. Yeah, right. I can't imagine. I can't fathom not having rugby and being obsessed with the sport in whatever capacity. So, yeah.
Definitely. Even during this time, when we're kind of stuck without rugby, it's really weird. I'm like, whoa, I have like too much free time. I have things that I can do on the weekend that aren't rugby. Like what, what am I supposed to fill my time with? So it's definitely weird. I find that like the transition from player to coach, I feel like it's very similar. The community is so small, it's so tight knit. I feel like a lot of people try to give back to the community as much as possible. So you have a lot of like volunteer coaching, college players that just need some guidance. And I feel like it's a very common theme that people just find opportunities where they can kind of just give back. And sometimes it ends up going further than that, So that's awesome. That's definitely kind of where I found myself too, is I wanted to help out where I could. And then sometimes you find a team that really wants to hold on to you and have you coach them. So it works out really nicely sometimes.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions here. So I started coaching full time because of, or I became the head coach of Loyola because I had an injury. And so I could commit the time to coaching for them. And so I tore a ligament in my knee last summer. And I have a question here about one of your injuries. Can you talk about the process of mental recovery with physical recovery, particularly during the 2011 and 2014 World Cup cycle when you had a severe injury? Do you mind telling us about that? What the injury was?
Yeah. So I had a number of different injuries throughout my playing career. But the major one that I think this question would be referring to would be my ACL. So that was in 2012, so during the 2014 World Cup cycle. And as with any major injury that takes you away from the ability to compete and play, I think that there's always going to be some kind of mental barriers that are associated with that. And so for me, it was just a matter of taking time to process that. Immediately you get immersed with all these fears and what ifs, like, oh, is it over? Am I going to be able to come back? Am I going to be able to come back in time? And that you're always, constantly trying out and trying to stay, at your top level, so you can be involved with elite level play in terms of the U.S. So, initially you have all those fears that come through your mind, but then it's just a matter of processing that and then, getting to the place where you can learn to control what you can control, right? So once it's happened, like you can't go back, you can't undo the injury. So you have to be okay with it. You have to get to a point where, it is what it is. I'm here now. What can I control? And then moving forward from that. And I think that when you want something bad enough, you're going to find a way to get there, right? So I tore my ACL in 2012, and it was during that season, but I'd already made the squad to go on tour. I think it was the Italy tour in November. So I had to miss that tour. And it's tough too. You have to give back all your kit that you got and everything, so that the player who takes your spot can have it. but yeah, it's just a matter of finding ways to stay motivated. And I was very fortunate to have a really strong support system as well. So, you know, with my family and with my teammates, that I was constantly supported in that drive, and reinforced with the belief that you know you can do this. You're going to get back. You're going to come back stronger. And then, you know, having that goal in sight, and keeping that in sight, and constantly work, you know, that helps with just the day-to-day battles that come along with a major injury like that.
Nice. Yeah, I similarly tore my PCL. So yeah, the knee injuries are tough. They take a long time, can be really mentally straining. But were you able to get back in time for the next for the World Cup? What was the result of that?
Yeah. So so it happened in the fall of 2012. I had surgery after that season, and I think exactly 6 months later, actually, it might have been like the day after my 6 month point, which was kind of like our big goal. Like, I had a really aggressive approach with my physical therapist at the time. We had a US camp, you know, exactly 6 months from when I had surgery. And so that was kind of what I set my eyes on. I'm like, I want to be able to go and play at that camp. And I did. I got cleared enough to be able to play. I mean, it was limited minutes to start, because you have to have that proper progression. But I think I was cleared for, you know, 20 minutes for each of the 3 scrimmages throughout that camp. And then went on tour that summer with the team, more so just to get back in that training environment and that, you know, competitive atmosphere, and being able to, you know, drill and compete against players at that level, at that, you know, during that tour, even though I wasn't eligible to play. That was in June, I believe. And then in July, I made the Nations Cup squad. So that was at about, I want to say I was like 7.5, 8, almost 8, about 8 months out from surgery. Yeah, and played through that competition, and did really well that competition. So it was quite the journey. But you know, that didn't end the journey, because you're constantly always, you know, if you have a major injury like that, you're constantly always thinking about it. So you have to really work hard to train your mindset, and the belief that, you know, that it's going to be okay, and then, you know, do what you can within your control. But it doesn't quite feel back to normal, you know, for much longer than that. But yeah, and then I got back into the pool, and then made the 2014 World Cup squad after that. So.
That's awesome. That's so cool. What a story. Anyone out there with an injury, now you know there's hope. You can get right back to it. You know, take your time, be patient with yourself, but you can get back to it. You can make the World Cup team, yeah. Even, you know, bouncing back from an injury. That is awesome. And then got to play in the World Cup again in 2017. So could we talk a little bit about those experiences? Kind of what was that like? What was your mental, physical preparation like for both of those tours?
Yeah, you know, I want to say that it was somewhat similar. You know, you go through these cycles in terms of both the physical and the mental prep throughout, you know, the years leading up to a World Cup, just because there's you know, 3 to 4. I mean, it's years in the making, years of process. So yeah, I think that some things that really helped me in terms of that preparation, especially with when it comes to mental preparation, is really developing and working to develop more of a growth mindset, right? Not being afraid to fail, and knowing that through failure and different obstacles comes growth and learning opportunity. And when you really embrace that kind of mindset, and actually JCL is one of the major, you know, influencers of that work. So he introduced me to the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, and I highly recommend that to anybody who's looking to, you know, find a way that you can look at really everything in terms of a learning opportunity, a way to grow and constantly strive to get better. I think the moment that you enter any kind of state of complacency or think that you're okay or think that you've made it, is the moment that you get bypassed, the moment that your growth stalls. So developing that kind of mindset and really being diligent in that chase, finding ways, like knowing my strengths, playing upon those strengths, and then finding ways to constantly grow and get better. That was kind of my mindset, is doing what I could within my control to continue to grow and prove that I can be out there for that length of time. So a lot of it was down to the mental training. I think was probably the biggest shift in terms of my growth as a player, doing that work.
Very cool. And we have a question here about kind of prehab exercises. So what are some of your favorite, physical prep exercises going into training, going into games, things like that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that with any, physical preparation, you always have to take in consideration, injury considerations. What are your major points of emphasis? What are your common injury locations and why, right? So it'd be hard to really pick out just a couple of exercises, because I think it's more of a holistic approach than that. But I think that the major considerations would be, one, concussion prevention, right? So doing neck strength and neck girth work to really help with that. Shoulder health is a major consideration. So finding ways to get the shoulder more connected to the rib cage and how it functions. So having a good balance of both stability but also mobility. I think being females, we're more prone to ACL injuries. And so having considerations around knee health, whether that's deceleration mechanics, movement efficiency, landing mechanics, overall posterior chain strength, glute strength, things like that. And then, spinal health as well. So you take into account the number of collisions that happen in rugby, whether it's at the ruck, whether it's at the tackle point. So really, knowing how to, or in the scrum, in those different isometric positions. So postural and body positioning comes into play. And then lastly, I think that would be kind of the linkage of the body as a chain, working to improve power transfer. So I try not to look at things too much in isolation, and try to find ways that we can just improve overall movement and efficiency. And I find that that's kind of the best way to attack those different injury considerations that come along with playing a sport with the demands of such as rugby.
Yeah, I was definitely gonna say and agree with you that like shoulder health, that's a big one. There's very few rugby players that you meet that haven't had some kind of like shoulder injury. So I mean that's huge, and like firing up that core and those glutes, like you said, I think that those are really, really big. To get people to really think about those. And I think one thing that I've come across is that some people just don't necessarily have the best like articulation in those things. They don't really know how to engage their core or know how it feels to like fire up their glutes and things like that. So I think just paying a little bit more attention to those things and knowing how that feels in your body, I think is really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, one of the most important things when it comes to training, whether it's, to improve performance or to mitigate injury is intention, or to just improve overall skill. Like intention is so important with what you do, whether it's, intention to move as fast as you can, which is really, really important for rate of force development and power. Oftentimes it's the intention that's more important than the actual speed of, the bar per se. But intention with your skill work, intention, like you said, is really, really important.
Awesome. I have another question here from JCL. How have you maintained your enthusiasm and love for the game over such a long time? We've talked a little bit about it, and of course we've talked a lot about rugby, but what has kept you kind of in it this whole time?
That's a really good question. I think, for me, I think anybody who plays the sport, who gets a taste of the sport, like right off the bat, like falls in love with it. Like rugby is so easy to fall in love with. And I think what keeps that, passion burning or relevant is how complex the game is, right? It provides so many different learning opportunities. Just when it comes to the skill, the sport coaching, or the strategy, tactics, or from the S&C piece, the strength conditioning piece. There's so many aspects that are involved with rugby, whether it's working to develop strength, power, speed, change of direction, repeat sprintability, aerobic capacity, recoverability, mobility, robustness. There's so many different facets that are involved with the game. It provides just a constant opportunity for learning and growth. And for me, that's probably what's most important, or will keep my attention for longest, where I can put my energy into areas where I can constantly learn and grow. And rugby is just one of those areas where there's so many different facets. You feel like you never know it all. You're always constantly learning, and there's always opportunity for that learning. And then also just the community, and the ability to network and meet different people around the world. One of the opportunities I got last year was to be a part of the World Rugby High Performance Academy. And I got to travel to South Africa, to Cape Town, and be a part of a group of individuals from all across the globe. And you get to learn and see what they do, in terms of in their country with rugby and with strength conditioning, and just get to go back and forth with your ideas. And it's just so cool to be able to travel all over the world and meet different people and network. And yeah, rugby is just constantly providing opportunity. And how could you walk away from that? How could you fall out of love with rugby, given that? So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you brought up, how complicated rugby can be. I think that is the best part about it, is that like it's a complex game, and that's what makes it so fun.
Yeah.
There aren't very many sports where one person can make so many different decisions. You can run with it, you can kick it, you can pass it. You don't really have that anywhere else. So it is cool. It's so cool that you can like do so many things with the sport, and that's awesome. The community is amazing, and it's so global. It's so cool that you've gotten to travel so much like through rugby, and again, like what sport lends you those opportunities, right? It's great. To circle things back to fitness a little bit, what recommendations do you have for a busy club player that maybe only has a session out of a week to train? You talked about a little bit about it's hard because you have to look at people's injury history and things like that, like what they have to focus on. So it's hard to be a little bit more general, but if you had to kind of pull together a couple different things for a training session, what would you focus on for the average club player that maybe doesn't have too much time on their hands?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And like you said, it's tough to give specific recommendations without knowing the background of the player or what they're involved in, what their training age is, and so on. But I would say, there definitely needs to be a focus on strength. Strength is obviously important for not only performance, but also when it comes to injury prevention, especially for younger or more raw athletes. Like one of the biggest predictors of non-contact injury in sport is muscle weakness. So if we can combat that just by getting stronger, that's going to be really, really important, right? So I would say, 2 days minimum of doing some strength work, but then also, making sure that you're hitting all the other aspects that are important to the game. So speed always has to be in play. In my opinion, it always has to be a part of the program. And, then taking care of those injury considerations that we talked about already, and having a big focus around rate of force development when it comes into the gym. And oftentimes that just can be with the intention of doing your strength work, having the intention to move the weight as fast as possible. But I would also recommend that, reach out to good S&C coaches in the area, find resources that you have access to in the area, because that coaching, especially for newer players, or if you don't have the S&C experience in the gym, that improvement on technique and that focus on just overall holistic movement and movement efficiency can be game changing in terms of their ability to play. But yeah, definitely need some kind of strength work. Definitely need some robust work. So, and a lot of times you can kind of find ways, if you're limited with time, find ways to create more of a coordinated approach. Too often S&C gets siloed. So you're either working, speed agility, or you're working injury prevention, or you're working strength, or you're working power or conditioning, so find a way where you can, or you're working skill development, well, can you find a way to create more of a coordinated approach and make better use of your time? Can you do skill work between reps of conditioning, or can you add some sprints at the end of your warm up with as a team, before your practice, and make use of that time together. Really just getting some full speed work in, so some max sprinting in, and a couple strength training sessions each week, I think would be where I would put my focus. Awesome.
Do you find that your experience as an S&C coach plays a lot in your coaching with Harvard? So, being a rugby coach, do those two things play on each other a lot?
Yeah, constantly. So one of my roles within the Harvard women's rugby team is to oversee their overall athletic development. So we work with a amazing strength coach, Beth, who is with the university. So she does all of our strength work or in the gym work. And then I kind of make sure all the pieces of the puzzle fit. And then I do all of our field work. And so a lot of that is combined through our training sessions, I'll do their warm up before practice, before training. And so we'll implement, those are great opportunities to implement different movement efficiency work or deceleration work, or get some quick sprints, some quick acceleration, some quick sprint work in, or we'll incorporate conditioning throughout the training practice. But a big thing that I use, both worlds, S&C and sport coaching, is just observation in terms of how the players are moving, and what is our overall work rate? Are they gassed? Can we push a little bit harder? How is the training practice set up? So we do a ton of planning and preparation work as a coaching staff, and we have an idea in terms of what we want that practice to look like. But then in reality, are they moving enough? Are they moving at the pace? Are they playing at the pace of play we want them, in terms of pushing that pace of play and challenging them? So that's a big part of my role, is just kind of overseeing that overall athletic development while doing the sport coaching too.
Awesome. And then kind of transitioning to your role as an S&C coach for the women's national team, I imagine that's pretty different, because you don't necessarily work with all the players, all the time. A lot of it, I imagine, is you have to send out the S&C program and kind of just see how people are doing. So what does that look like? Do they kind of send you reports on what their results have been? What is that like?
Yeah, so it's all done mostly from a remote training environment. Obviously, all the athletes are scattered across the U.S. So we send out, I work with Ian Jones. He kind of oversees everything, and he'll do a lot of the base programming, and then I'll be in contact with the players on a relatively consistent basis. So I kind of split them up into 3 groups, and contact one group every week, and just checking in with them, seeing how they're doing, seeing what they need, and then I'll make all of the individual modifications based on what they have access to, where they're at in terms of health and recovery, or any injury considerations, things like that. So it's all done remotely for the most part. And then, we map it out, kind of working backwards from our next camp or competition, and kind of have an idea in terms of how we want the year to go with loading. When can we push, and when do we need to back off a little bit? And most of our athletes are playing, competitively in the WPL, which is great because we can kind of work with that season and kind of map out our camps, around that and provide different opportunities to get together. And, obviously it'd be great to be in more of a daily training environment on a consistent basis, but that's just not the reality. So at least not at this point. So right now it's just kind of managing what we can do in a remote environment. And then we do some wellness monitoring as well. So every day the athletes will fill out a wellness questionnaire, and that'll let us know kind of their trends in soreness, trends in or any kind of injuries if those pop up, sleep and recovery, and whether there are certain aspects of that we need to address with individual players.
Very cool. Very cool. And, having everything remote, a lot of the players must be very, self-motivated to do it because no one's forcing them to do it. So we have a question about motivation. What is your advice for someone that maybe needs a little motivation to get to the gym? I'm a fitness professional and I also need, motivation to get to the gym. I don't always do it on my own. So what kind of advice do you have for people that need a little extra kick to get working?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, especially in this current state, with everything that's going on in the world, a lot of uncertainty with everything too. So motivation has been a big factor. And, so I think it's finding ways to increase engagement. So whether that's through connection with teammates, finding someone who can help keep each other accountable in terms of getting that work in, and just finding ways to get back into a routine. So right now with the COVID, comes a certain amount of psychological stress. And often with that, disengagement and that disruption to your natural routine. Most people are working from home and, don't have access to gym or equipment or sometimes even field space. So really about, kind of taking a step back and allowing the athletes to process that and where we are and cope, finding those different coping strategies. But then, at the end of the day, you have to find that way to get motivated, because there's also a lot of opportunity that comes with this time of uncertainty, and the main one is having the time, having more time. So how can you best utilize that time? And one of the things we did with our Harvard athletes that worked really, really well in terms of getting that motivation back is doing some goal setting, just like you would at the beginning of every season. Kind of do some goal setting. What do you want to get out of this season, right? Only now the language changes. Like, what do you want to get out of this time? And just because there's, not necessarily a real distinct endpoint, or because we're in this time of pause, essentially, right? We're in this period of unknown, doesn't mean that our growth needs to be on pause, right? So what can we do individually? What can we do as a team? What are those areas that are often overlooked that maybe I can put more energy into, given that I have the time for now? And finding those, those little bits that you can work on. And, at the end of the day, when you look back at the time that you had, are you happy with how you utilized it? Were you able to still grow in whatever capacity that is? And like sometimes it's needed to get that external motivation. So have those conversations with teammates, create routines, and maybe, find ways to help each other stay accountable. But I think that goal setting is one of the big things that has really helped in terms of that motivation and developing that routine again.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also think like during this time when people do have a little bit more time, it's a great opportunity to try some new things. Like maybe you realize that you actually do love calisthenics training and you just never done it before because you didn't have the opportunity to. So I think it is a good opportunity to just try different things. Maybe like, now that most people are working remotely, you have time to go running in the middle of the day, and that's like a really nice habit for you to fall into. So you never really know until you try, and I think this is a good time for people to just try things out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is important in this time, is finding ways to get creative, and finding ways to use your environment, or maybe changing the way that you look at your environment. So, you know, do you notice which streets are at an incline? You know, what kind of inclines? Are there grass hills nearby? Are there railings nearby that you can use? Are there, you know, trees or ledges? You know, starting to look at your environment a little bit differently and think about ways that you can utilize that environment, given that you don't have access to what would be your normal training environment.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super smart. You talked a little bit about how the majority of the women's national team now plays in the WPL. I know that that wasn't always the case, so it must be pretty cool to, you know, you've played in the WPL, a league that's been around a long time. What has the transition kind of been like over the years? You know, how has the women's game changed? How has the selections process changed? And you've been a big part of that this whole time. So I'm sure that you've seen a lot of differences throughout the years. Kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of changes in the women's game in particular. When I look back, you know, I think a couple of those points of differences that I noticed right away was just in the overall pace of play. You know, the game is getting faster, which is a good thing. So that has definitely been changing. I think too, just in the opportunities. So, you know, during my playing career, they added contracts out at the Olympic Training Center. So opportunities to be training as a rugby player full time was massive. And then I think also looking at the college game and that push to, you know, to try and get 40 teams, you know, with the NCAA or varsity status. I think we're currently at 23 or 24 going into this next fall season. So I think the opportunities, you know, have been the biggest points of difference in terms of the women's game. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then so you know the other part of that too is having another emphasis on the WPL and developing that. I think that just, you know, the more that we can raise the level of competition in the U.S. Domestically, the better off that we'll be able to compete internationally, right? And so that's by you know, you get better when you play teams that are better than you, or when you can push those limits a little bit, when you can push that pace of play, when you can play up in a sense. You know, you're not going to get a lot of growth playing teams and you're just washing over them. So if we can, you know, collectively build up the level of competitive play in the U.S., I think that's a good thing for all involved.
Awesome. Are there any particular moments where you thought, you know, the women's game is getting stronger, or any kind of moments that stand out to you?
I'm trying to think of like specific moments, and that's tough. First, my memory is horrible. But I think that, you know, for me personally, going from D1 level of competition to WPL, like I said, I noticed right away that the pace of play was just drastically different. And then making that jump from WPL to international level, again, the biggest difference is the pace of play. So the more that we can get, you know, kind of comfortable pushing that pace, you know, the better that we'll be able to compete against other countries. But I think that the women's game still has a long way to go. Like, I'm not going to be, you know, want to be realistic in terms of that. I think, you know, rugby in general in the U.S. has a long ways to go. I think that, you know, that constantly remains a focus in terms of, you know, improving opportunities, increasing opportunities for women as coaches, increasing opportunities for, you know, women as players, and working to just overall continue to better the women's game in the U.S. Needs to constantly be a focus and talked about.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, especially the quality and quantity of, you know, coaches in the U.S. Especially in you know, college women's. It's really hard. There's a lot of club teams out there that are player coach. I think that is a very common theme for a lot of the, you know, the women's clubs and college teams out there. So just having, coaches that are available, and, as players retire, like yourself, hopefully they go ahead and move towards those coaching roles. Have you seen kind of a shift in that? Do you feel like there are more female coaches? Do you feel like there are more opportunities for coaches to kind of move up and get better?
I don't know. I guess it's still a relatively, newer area for me to really speak to that. But I think in general, the more that we can create kind of some consistency in coaching, especially at the club level, I think we see a lot of change and turnover from year to year in terms of both players and from a coaching standpoint, and that's really hard to create long-term development, right, and health and sustainability at that club level. In terms of at the collegiate level, I think it's still in its, obviously in a very strong growing process. So hopefully more and more opportunities will become available, and more women will, put their hands up and be seen. I think a lot of it comes from, top down, like the people in power. Who are the people in power that are making the decisions, and what are the opportunities that they're providing? So I think that needs to be kind of a collective goal of all, both rugby players being advocates for your sport, and then also coaches and players that give back to the game and get into coaching, is continuing to grow rugby and have that kind of aspiration to to continue to grow the sport and give more opportunity for players to play, give more opportunity for youth to find the game. Because we all love it, and so at the end of the day, what can we do to help the sport and to help provide those different opportunities?
Awesome. That kind of wraps up the questions that I had. Do you have any fitness advice for anyone that's out there listening, especially as it pertains to sport, even if it's not pertaining to sport?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been really kind of talking about and keeping in the foreground right now currently is, given the challenges that we currently have, the access to equipment, access to gym, access to normal training environments, kind of where do you place your focus? And I think, some of the biggest considerations with the challenges that we have and getting back into sport, is obviously one of the biggest concerns is the detraining effect. And that's kind of, the residual effects kind of depend on athlete's training age and experience. So the more experienced you are, the more of an elite athlete that you are in terms of your training age and experience, the more likely you're going to keep more of your strength training, but what you will lose, or what kind of has a more of a use it or lose it approach, is your speed and power. So I would say, if anything, the emphasis needs to be put on sprinting and jumping, obviously done in a progressive way if you haven't been doing that, because it is highly demand, but that's one of the best things that, you don't need any equipment for. And doing sprint work is probably the best way to get that high intensity neuromuscular stimulus that we are missing right now, with not being able to train the way that we normally train. So in terms of mitigating those injuries when we do get the opportunity to return to sport, I think that that's going to be huge, is making sure the more that we have some kind of sprinting, jumping emphasis now, the better we'll be when we come back to sport, when we're able to come back and play and train, avoid things that are soft tissue injuries, hamstring issues, Achilles issues, and so on. So, I mean, you take a look at the NFL lockdown period, for instance, in 2011, when they came back to play, there was a massive spike in Achilles tendon injuries. And that's because, you're missing that high stress neuromuscular stimulus. So we can get that through sprinting. So have an emphasis on that. And then getting creative when it comes to other strength work, so using utilizing unilateral exercises, loading whenever and however possible, utilizing tempo to increase time under tension. So whether you're doing some single leg or upper body eccentrics, different plyometrics and landings, to increase or have a greater eccentric stimulus. Utilizing isometrics, so different holds and different positions. You can change the muscle length when you do that. But that's going to work to increase that tendon stiffness and allow for increased peak force development. So just getting more creative, but probably putting less of an emphasis on things that you kind of see in your typical, boot camp body weight programs. That's fine from an aerobic capacity standpoint or just general training standpoint. But in terms of being specific training as an athlete, training as a rugby player, we need a greater stimulus. We need a greater neuromuscular stimulus. And so finding ways to do that, getting creative. So I would say that'd be one major takeaway with this challenge. I think the second kind of major takeaway that or big learning for me and kind of advice to current rugby players that are still playing is just to really enjoy the journey, right? And enjoy the process. I think that the less focus you can put on specific outcomes, the more you're going to get out of the sport, the more meaningful relationships you're going to develop. And I think that was something, if I were to look back on and give my younger self some advice, it would be to slow down and be more present in the moment. I was always constantly like looking to the next thing. What's the next? When are the next invites going to come out? When's the next training camp? When's the next tour? When's the next this? And so I would say my biggest takeaway, in terms of my learning as a player, would be just to enjoy the game, and enjoy the relationships that you get to develop throughout the game with your teammates, with people that you play against. People all around the globe. I mean, rugby, like you said, is such a small, close-knit community. So slow down and work to be more present, and the rest will kind of fall into place.
I love that. You've also definitely inspired me to find the nearest hill and sprint. So
yes, good.
Take care of your bodies, everyone. Well, thank you, Sylvia, so much for taking the time out to do this Star Speak episode. It's been so much fun to talk to you. Thank you to anyone that is watching this, is listening to this, and hopefully you've gotten a lot of takeaways from the both of us. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions or want to talk further, feel free to hand out my contact information. Would love to connect. So go North Shore. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sylvia.